I'll be presenting the Fair Education Act Implementation Webinar. This presentation is brought to you by Yo! Disabled and Proud and the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. And today, I, Kirk Aranda, will be moderating today's presentation and will be presenting with two guest speakers, Dolores Tejada and Ray Uzeta. The first slide that I have up is, what is disability history? Disability history is the history of disability rights and independent living movements and the significant historic contributions of people with disabilities in society. It becomes important to know what disability history is because oftentimes people teach what they think is disability history but ends up being disability etiquette instead. Realizing the difference between the two will be key and crucial when lesson plans are starting to be made, because if disability etiquette is taught in schools, then our history will not be learned. But disability etiquette can be learned by teaching disability history. So then we come to, why is disability history important? Disability history is important to have schools educate their classes so that way the distinction between disability history and disability etiquette is made, and more people become educated and familiar with the contributions that we have made throughout the history of California. The participants that are in the short video I'm about to show you are from the Yo! Disabled and Proud Disability History Campaign Summit that Yo! Was held at the Sierra Health Foundation's Grizzly Creek Camp in 2010. They explain why disability history is important to them, so let's take a look at it.
This video was filmed at the 2010 Yo! Organizing Disabled and Proud Disability History Campaign Summit Yo! Held at the Sierra Health Foundation Grizzly Creek Camp. Youth are sitting in front of a disability history display. Interspersed are photos of youth at the Yo! Summit, testifying at the state capitol, marching for disability history at Disability Capital Action Day, speaking at rallies, receiving awards, and having fun.
Why should disability history be taught in schools?
I think disability history should be taught in schools so students with disabilities and future generations don't go through the same types of teasing that we have while we were growing up.
Because I believe every person with a disability should know about their own history, and it'll also educate other people to learn about the history as well, so nothing will be left out.
Well, I think it should be taught because when I first participated in YLF 2 years ago, I had no clue about our history. And one example I can say was when I was in high school, I would be very ashamed of my disability. And 2 years ago when I participated in YLF as a staff, I learned a lot of our history, and also I came out really changed. And yeah, that's what I think it is.
Disability history should be taught in schools because whether you have a disability or not, if students are able to learn about the leadership and efforts and achievements of the disability community and how we received our rights, I think that a lot of there will be a decrease in discrimination, hopefully, and the stigma towards the disability community.
Disability history is important to me because it gives, allowing me to show this to people, gives me a sense of comfort for where I belong, what I'm a part of, a stronger sense of what my community really is, and it also kind of gives a sense of validation rather than, poor me. I think it also will give other people a chance to see me as an individual rather than part of another world, someone part of another world, and I think that's great.
I think disabilities should be taught in school because other people about disabilities and they will really know how to handle people with. Thank you, disabilities.
Okay, well, disability history should be taught in schools because it's important information that needs to be taught to people without disabilities and people with disabilities. It's just like every other history lesson that's been taught in school. If it's important, it should be in the history books.
Disability history is important to me because the fights that we've gone through for, or that other people have gone through for our rights, it's part of me. It's a part of who I am. And without them having done that, I wouldn't have been able to be who I am today. It is also important to me that it be taught in schools because I think it's important that people know, that I know and other people with disabilities and without know that it's part of who we are, it's part of our culture, it's part of our community, and they teach civil rights from almost every other aspect but ours.
There is such a stigma with the greater public that we are helpless and voiceless and that we need them to do everything for us. If disability history is taught in schools, then we can show other people and ourselves that we are able to get changed by ourselves. Not to mention, it strengthens our identity as a community.
This video is dedicated to California youth with disabilities who organized the past Disability History Week, ACR 162, Bell 2010. California is the 24th state in America to pass such a law or resolution. Special thanks to Sarah Musavian, Monique Garcia, Raul Carrell, Ali Cannington, Anya Fatau, Cesar Saborn, Destiny Woods, Kevin Kaufman, Jaquay Bryant, James Henderson, Catherine Keller. We would like to thank our funders and sponsors. California Health Incentives and Improvement Project at San Diego State University. California Department of Rehabilitation. California State Independent Living Council. Consumer Attorneys of California. And Sierra Health Foundation.
And now I will continue on with the presentation. And watching the video, that just goes to show why disability history is definitely important that it's taught in schools. So the next slide is, with the importance of disability history, that leads me to Disability History Week. Disability History Week in California is celebrated during the second week of October and is part of the national youth-led movement to increase awareness of disability history. And Disability History Week encourages schools and colleges to highlight the disability rights movements and disability. So then, that finally brings me to what you guys are all here for. What is the Fair Education Act? Some of you may be wondering, what exactly is the Fair Education Act? Well, FAIR stands for Fair, Accurate, Inclusive, and Respectful Education Act, which is a common sense law that requires schools to integrate factual information about social movements, current events, and history of people with disabilities, people of color, and LGBT people into existing social study lessons. It also prevents schools from adopting instructional materials that discriminate. So now that you have a little bit of background on what the Fair Education Act is, you're probably thinking, who decides on what students will actually learn? Lessons are required under the Fair Education Act must be age appropriate for each school and will be developed at the local level where school districts, local stakeholders, and decision makers will decide what's appropriate for each classroom based on parent and teacher input. So then the next point that I have is, what kind of things might students learn about the Fair Education Act? Well, coursework may vary, but local school districts, parents, and teachers might consider including in high school history course lessons, such as, in the course of learning about civil rights movements of the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, a discussion about the birth of a movement to secure equal opportunities and equal rights for people with disabilities, from Ed Roberts and independent living to the landmark American Rehabilitation Act in the 70s, and the Americans with Disabilities Act in the 1990s, as well as the Stonewall riots in New York 1969 that helped spark the modern-day lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT civil rights movement for equality. This all sounds great, but when did the Fair Education Act go into effect? Somebody might be wondering. The Fair Education Act actually went into effect on January 1st of 2012, this year, but that doesn't mean all schools in California will immediately become inclusive. We need to make sure that the law is implemented and that we get fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful instructional materials into our classrooms. We need supporters to get involved, work with students, parents, educators, and administrators to explain the importance of this law and direct people to resources for making their schools more inclusive. And the final point that I have is, how does the Fair Education Act positively, in fact, impact kids? Well, discrimination doesn't belong in the classroom, and the Fair Education Act prevents schools from adopting learning materials with a discriminatory bias or negative stereotypes based solely on race, ethnicity, religion, disability, and sexual orientation that can alienate students and foster an environment where bullying thrives. Preventing discrimination and teaching about historical movements and the contributions of people from all backgrounds, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, disability, or sexual orientation, fosters an atmosphere of dignity and respect that makes schools safer for all students. Well, everybody, we have a special guest speaker with us today, and his name is Ray Uzeta. And he's going to present a brief history lesson for us to kind of give us an example of the history that we'll be learning in our classes, in our history classes. So everyone, here is Ray Uzeta.
Great. And Kirk, what I have, about 5 minutes, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. And mostly the people are on the line are from the IL centers?
Yeah. IL centers, volunteers.
Okay. Yeah, okay. For those of you who are with the IL Center, just really briefly, I worked for the Center for Independent Living back in the 70s. I was hired by Ed Roberts. I worked for Ed for several years before he became director of the Department of Rehabilitation. I started the San Francisco ILC. I was the first director, and then I came down to San Diego and worked for the ILC down here. Back then it was called Community Service Center for the Disabled. Worked for them for 10 years. Also, I was the first chairman of the California Coalition of Independent Living Centers from 77 to 82, which was the precursor to the Foundation for Independent Living Centers. So I have a big ILC background. But what I wanted to share with you is, before the ILC came around, a lot of disability advocacy was already going on. I grew up in San Francisco, so let me give you a couple of examples of what was going on. Starting right around the beginning, late 60s, early 70s, there was an organization started way back in the 50s called Indoor Sports Club. And there's still probably some pretty active chapters around the country. And predominantly, it was a group for socialization of people with disabilities, and they had chapters all over the place. In San Francisco, in the 70s, when the voters passed the bond issue to establish the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, BART, we knew that Market Street and Mission Street were going to be all torn up. And people in the Indoor Sports Club, specifically Herb Meyerson with the Laguna Chapter saw that as an opportunity to lobby and advocate to put curb cuts on Market Street in San Francisco. So IRB organized all the indoor sports chapters, some of the voluntary health organizations like Muscular Dystrophy, Center for the Blind, Easter Seals, and put forth before the Board of Supervisors through one of the committees a proposal to put curb cuts along Market Street. That met with fierce resistance from the San Francisco Department of Public Works, but we prevailed in the committee hearings. George Moscone, who became mayor, was the committee chair. He had a big supporter back then with Supervisor John Molinari. Board of Supervisors unanimously approved putting curb cuts in Market Street as part of the BART project. That was the very first architectural barrier removal victory in ordinance in San Francisco history. When those hearings were going on, a guy named John Edmonds, who was a post-polio wheelchair user, came up to me and said, hey, congratulations to all you guys, I want to get involved with you guys. So John was a civil engineer working for Bechtel Corporation, and we talked about what the next step is. So I said, let's do a bigger endeavor. So one Saturday, somewhere in the early 70s, John Edmonds, me, and a guy named Ken Ream, who was the president of Indoor Sports, met in my apartment, little apartment, and on my little coffee table, we laid out the street map of San Francisco and penciled in all the major commercial areas in San Francisco and all the streets. So from Mission, from Ferry Building, all the way up to Army Street, Excelsior, Sunset, Richmond, all downtown San Francisco. We penciled everything in where we wanted curb cuts. Went back to the public hearings at that time by Mayor Joe Alioto they were having hearings on community development block grants, and we got the mayor's support for a 5-year commitment to designate CDBG funds to do curb cuts throughout the entire city of San Francisco over a period of 5 years. And that was our second major victory. And then we went after the their railway system to make their streetcars and buses accessible. We lost that battle initially, but it's kind of ironic because one of the proposals by John Edmonds for the streetcars was to have elevated platforms. That got rejected, so it's ironic for me to go back to San Francisco 30 years, 40 years later and see elevated platforms along Market and every place else that John Edmonds had talked about. Now that's the San Francisco brief history. But the other thing that was going on, starting in the 1970s, was the creation of the back then called the California Association of the Physically Handicapped, CAPH. CAPH was started by 5 guys sitting in a bar in San Rafael talking about what can be done to remove architectural barriers in California. One of the people said, hey, why don't you go out and start an organization? The guy said, okay, I accept your challenge. That guy's name was Dick Wooten. Dick Wooten was an employee of the Department of Rehabilitation. He lived up in Sacramento at the time. And Dick went around the state of California identifying disability advocates and started CAPH from ground zero. Incorporated the organization as a 501c4 organization so it could do lobbying. And his first legislative victory was the early 70s, which was to make public buildings accessible to people with disabilities, back then using the ANSI standards. And that was the first architectural barrier removal law in California. A year later, on that victory, CAPH went after a new law to make all public accommodations accessible. And public accommodations means restaurants, hotels, office buildings. And that's really where all this progress you've seen whenever you go and see accessible facilities, you see curb cuts, accessible bathrooms. All of that is a result of legislation sponsored by CAPH. CAPH, which I was heavily involved in, also got behind the disabled students at the California State University systems and helped lobby through California legislature the creation of the Disabled Student Services Network and funding, and that now is institutionalized in the California State University system. CIL really kind of started before CIL on the UC campus in Berkeley. People with severe disabilities were put into Cal Hospital. That's where Ed Roberts, John Hessler, some other people first met. And there's an opportunity that John Heschler saw for funding for services for college students with disabilities, wrote a proposal, got funded, and that started the Disabled Student Services Program on campus at UC Berkeley. Out of that experience, the people in the community kind of got together and say, look, we accomplished this for students. Why don't we bring this concept of peer counseling, advocacy to the broader community? And that's really the genesis of the creation of CIL. And people like Dan McEwen, Bill Draper, and other people were really the people who came up with this idea. Ed was part of that. And then, maybe around 73 or something, CIL got incorporated and then started off. And then once Ed went to Sacramento and became state director of rehab in 1976, he made a lot of funding available, which started the original 7 IOCs in California. And over the years, expanded to 24. So you really had multiple things going on in the late 60s, 70s. You had indoor sports club people advocating. You had the creation of CAPH, founded by Dick Wooten, that did all the legislative lobbying in Sacramento. Tremendous successes over the decades. CAPH morphed into what's now called CDR, Californians for Disability Rights. And then, then you had a creation of the ILC movement out of Berkeley. So that's kind of a quick history of the genesis of a lot of stuff that those of you who are younger than I am are now inheriting all those political victories and new programs that got initiated back in the 70s. How's that for 5 minutes, Kirk?
That was wonderful, Ray. Thank you very, very much. All right, everybody, that was Ray Uzeta, and what he was just telling us, that is exactly what we should be learning in school. Not disability etiquette, we should be learning about disability history, just like that. And I thank Ray again. I know he's already off the call, but that was great. So then, next it comes to what's next for the Fair Education Act. Where is it at right now? Right now, the FAIR Act is in the stage that schools are taking a slow approach to implementing it. The information in school textbooks are not going to change until schools get new textbooks, which won't be until 2015. And we don't really want to wait that long for disability history to be taught in schools, especially if the law is already in effect. But what this does give us is it gives everyone a great opportunity to organize and educate, to get your voices heard out in the community. By getting out there and advocating, you can have a voice in what is going to be put in the textbooks when they are changed in 2015. Next, you're probably wondering, what can you do about getting the FAIR Act implemented? So you want to get your voice heard out there, but what can you do to hold schools accountable for implementing the Fair Education Act? Are there any ideas that you guys have on what you can do by any chance? Are there any ideas that you guys have on what you can do to hold schools accountable for implementing the Fair Education Act? So Madeline, Teresa, and Rachel, you think we need to get in front of school boards? Dolores, talk to teachers so they know what the Fair Education Act is. And Madeline, Teresa, and Rachel, I love that you added more tiers and asked them how they can implement them. Those are all great ideas and great suggestions, and that is what we should be doing, really. And there are other ways, too, that we can hold schools accountable, such as, oh, Liz Pope added something, too. Go in front of your local Disability Advisory Commission. That's definitely a great idea, too. Get everybody on your side, get the word out about the FAIR Act that needs to be implemented. So that's great too, Liz. Thank you. But there are other ways too that we can make sure schools hold up the implementation, such as going to district PTA meetings to sit in, and basically, like some people already said, just ask them, hey, so what are you doing about the implementation about the Fair Education Act, and where are you at in the process? And then also be sure to ask them, what can you do to get involved to help out to make sure it's implemented? You can also go to school board meetings and meet with administrators to bring up the FAIR Act and see if there's any way you can become involved as well. Well, I want to remind them that at one time, teaching evolution was controversial. Thank you, Laura. And yeah, that is a good thing to bring up too. Definitely one of the other ways. Does anybody else have any other ways to bring up the implementation of the FAIR Act?
Can I speak?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I didn't know if I. Well, I come from the LGBT community, but because the textbooks aren't going to be changed till 2015, I think it's important to have something to give these schools, handouts, things that they can start using right away.
I definitely agree, and that's something we're all of us are working on and will be working on as well. Gathering sources together, bring them all together in one. Maybe you'll have your own sources, and you also want to work with educators to work on materials, so that way it's not just from one side of things too. But yeah, definitely when you go to these PTA meetings, board member meetings, you'll want to have materials with you to show them that, hey, we have materials. This is stuff that I think would be great to go in textbooks when they change. Looks like we got some more people bringing in suggestions. Ben?
Actually, I mean,
oh, go ahead.
I think they should be using them now, not wait for the textbooks.
Oh, use them now instead of waiting for the textbooks?
Get them started right away. If we have information that they can start using in the schools, I think it's important to have that and to get them started and not wait until 2015 was really my point.
Well, yeah, that's true too. That's a great point. Like I mentioned earlier, why wait until 2015? Granted, we can create the material in the process, but if we have materials that they can use right now instead of waiting, that'd be great too. So that way the FAIR Act is going on now instead of waiting. So that I get you make a great point. And it looks like Ben mentioned related to past civil rights strides, which is great too. Rose McDonald introduced the topic to students, youth, until textbooks are changed, and have their opinions heard as well and provide new materials. That's great too. That's similar to what we were just talking about. And Lauren Steinberg create a wiki-style site where they can get information, which is a great thing that's going on right now, where groups are trying to bring together information that they have, a history, and bring it all in one spot. So there's one big source material everybody can go to, and they can give to educators as references or just hand them materials. Ben McMullen, largest minority group. It's good too. Does anybody else have any suggestions for how we get the FAIR Act implemented? Okay, maybe that was the last question. And some of these things that we're talking about right now with the questions, we'll actually be showing links a little bit later to already created material that we have. So I'll be moving on now to the next slide, and it's getting organized. And these are all great and effective ways to outreach that we've gone over, but you don't have to do it alone or by yourself. You can connect with various organizations to help organize a group to help ensure the FAIR Act is enforced. There are key decision makers that will be a big part of getting the Fair Education Act implemented, which I'll briefly touch on, just a couple of them, which would include contacting California school districts, which are all the schools throughout California. There's also the California County Offices of Education, which are important decision makers. I'm trying to get organized. And trying to get organized, you will also want to connect with community allies, which could range from your local independent living centers, parent groups, SELPAs, the GSA Network, and PFLAG, which is the Parents, Family, and Friends of Lesbian and Gays. These are only a few of the groups that you could contact and organize with in getting people together to advocate for implementing the Fair Education Act. You may know plenty of other organizations, though, that would make great allies as well. Lastly, you'll want to take action, though. You'll want to have materials handy, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, and ready at meetings to go. So you'll want to put together resources that you or your group or organization may have already or are working on currently. By showing the school districts that we have materials already ready to refer to, that's a huge asset instead of waiting until 2015, which we can start just teaching now, really. And also, to help organize and take action, you can always look towards social networking. With Facebook and Twitter, they become great organizing tools to get people together for a common cause, whether it's just nationwide support or coming together in one place for an event. With Facebook, you can message people in groups so they all get the same message, as well as leaving messages on people's pages to make them aware of what is going on. There's also the tool of creating an event that you can invite people to through Facebook, which is great for organizing such an event as gathering people to go to a local PTA meeting to speak up about the FAIR Act. Twitter is also the same way as Facebook, where you can get a message out to a lot of people to try and organize and put together something. Next, we'll be going over the resources that we mentioned. So you don't have, like I mentioned before, you don't have to do this all by yourself. Right here on this resource page, we have some links to help you get started on where to look so you can start advocating. So on the first link, this involves decision makers. If you want to talk to your local school district but don't know how to go about contacting them, by clicking on the link, this will take you to a list of every school district that is in California and what their location is, the phone you can reach them at, and their personal website, so that we have all the information you need to try and find them. You can scroll down through the whole list. It's in alphabetical order from A to J, and then you just click on the links K through R and S through Y. So that way they'll take you to whatever city, whatever school district. You'll be able to find your school, and you'll be able to find who you need to contact, really, so you know where exactly to go. The California Department of Education county offices, which support school districts by performing tasks that can be done more efficiently and economically at the county level. Offices also provide and help formulate new curricula, staff development and training programs, and instructional procedures, and they may perform many other services to meet changing needs and requirements. So this would be a really great source to tap into to find, and you can find your local county office. They'll provide you with information on how to contact them by phone. Also gives you their website address, so you can check out their website to find out more information about them. And you can also click on more info on the right-hand side. It'll provide even the contact information of the superintendent, such as their name, their phone number, and their email address. So you could just go straight to the superintendent, send emails, letters, which would be a good way to go about that. For the next page, this page of resources has key allies, and we only listed a couple of the many allies that we can get in contact with. But the first link that you click on is for SELPA. It'll take you to their website. And SELPA is the Special Education Local Plan Area, which is dedicated to guaranteeing equal opportunity for all students to become successful in society, and collaborates with county agencies and school districts to develop and maintain healthy and enriching environments for success. By clicking on the link, it will take you to a more detailed description of SELPA, as well as a contact list, so that way you'll be able to get in touch with your local SELPA organization, which includes the location it's at, what city they're in, and their phone number, so that way you'll be able to get in touch with them, try and organize with them, and see what you guys can do. Another ally is the GSA network. The GSA network is the Gay Straight Alliance Network, and it is a youth leadership organization that connects schools, school-based gay straight alliances to each other and community resources through peer support, leadership development, and training. By clicking on the link, it will take you to the GSA website, which provides you with information on how to find your local GSA, resources that they have, and more information and history on their organization. By clicking on the directory link, and it'll help you find your local GSA, and it'll give you a list of different GSAs, allowing you to search and find the nearest one to you. Then for our last page of resources, we have a link that takes you directly to the YO website, which provides you with various organizational tools and materials that teachers can check out and use too. There's materials that range from information on the Fair Education Act to disability history facts, what's been done for Disability History Week, activities, and there's also lesson plans that are already mapped out, each specifically for elementary school, middle school, and high school. So like we were talking about earlier, there is some curriculum already developed and ready to go. These are early guidelines to what schools should be teaching for disability history. So then for our next slide, we have Advocating with Dolores Tejada, and she's been doing this process of going to PTA meetings, school board meetings for the past couple of years, and will explain to you how the process works and what she goes through, as well as what she has come up with when she does go to schools. So everyone, please welcome Dolores Tejada.
Hi, for having me on. My name is Dolores Tejada. I'm the a community organizer here at Community Resources for Independent Living, the Independent Living Center that serves Southern Alameda County. So one of the main parts of my job is that I'm the organizer for the youth group, which is called Disability Action Network for Youth. And we have about 15 members, and we have a meeting once a month. And I've been organizing the group for a little bit over 2 years now. So when what I'm going to talk about today is in the context of Disability History Week, because that's a lot of the work that we've been doing up until this point. And then I'm going to talk about how that relates to fair education and how a lot of the steps that we did for Disability History Week we are going to continue to do for fair education. And when I say we, I mean those of us in the group, the Disability Action Network for Youth. So we, as a group, decided that we wanted to be involved with the Disability History Week campaign, and we took steps to make sure that we could achieve our goals. One of the main things that we wanted to do was that we knew that Disability History Week was a resolution that existed statewide, much like fair education, but that school districts didn't acknowledge it or that they didn't know that it existed yet, which may be the case for the Fair Education Act right now. So what we decided to do was to pick out 4 of the local school boards and school districts to target, and we picked those by deciding where the group members were from. So each of the cities that we targeted, we had at least 1 member from that area. And from there we sent them, via email, we sent them a copy of the resolution, and we requested to be placed on their agenda. And when we got placed on their agenda, within 1 week we were at 4 school board meetings. So what we did was each of us, at least one of us, went to each one of those school board meetings and spoke in front of the school board and talked about our personal experience and why disability history is important to us. From there, they voted whether to pass Disability History Week on the local level, which means they knew that they acknowledged that it existed as a statewide resolution, but they also wanted to acknowledge disability history on the local level. So all of the school boards passed Disability History Week unanimously. So that was 4 school boards, and we were really, really excited about that. So it really, for us, was easy because it took an email and explaining to them what disability history was about. And what we did was we emailed the board president, and then we CC'd all the members of the board. So the board president was the person that we directed it to, but we knew that just in case, school boards members get a lot of emails, we wanted to send it to everybody else as well. From there, because a lot of us working on Fair Education Act are young folks, from there the districts each individual district guided us on what to do. They would say, hey, I need you to call this person, or hey, send this email and with the resolution over to this person who makes the agendas. So a lot of the times, and most of the times, what I found is that the school boards are really enthusiastic, especially when it's coming from youth, and they will help you in the process to make sure you can get it on the agenda. So one of the other things when members were speaking, and some of the people that spoke at school boards are on this call too, is when we talked in front of the school boards and said why we cared about disability history, we said what we would help do in order to make sure that disability history was a real thing. So what we offered them was resources and already made curriculum that other people were using so that they could pass it out to their teachers. One school board district in particular gathered a bunch of different curriculum and sent it to every teacher in the school district. So every teacher and every grade level had a copy of curriculum that they could use in the classroom. The other thing that we decided to do was we wanted to make sure that we knew our own disability history, and we wanted to go out and present it. So we were able to make contact with teachers that we already knew. Some of us, a lot of the students, since a lot of us are young and we had just graduated high school, we knew teachers who we liked, who we approached and said, hey, can we come into your classroom during Disability History Week and teach this? And they were really, really excited about it. So in 2010, in October during Disability History Week, we did presentations at about 4 schools. In March of 2011, we did presentations at 1 school for a whole day. And then again in October during Disability History Week of 2011, so just a couple months ago, we did an entire week of presentations at 5 different schools. So each year it's getting bigger and bigger for us, and so far we've estimated that we've reached over 1,000 high school students and talked to them about Disability History Week. And we were able to connect with teachers, and once teachers seen that the students cared about it and were interested in what we were teaching them, they get really excited, and it's easier to go back the next year and continue to teach disability history. So how does this relate to the Fair Education Act? Many of the same steps that we already did, we're going to continue doing. So we're going to approach school boards and make sure that they know it exists. We're going to create curriculum on the local level that we can work to make sure teachers have it. And we're going to talk to teachers and to administrators at schools so that they know that there's something that they should be doing. So what we plan on doing with Fair Education Act, because it addresses more than just disability, we are really excited to work with other groups, and we're going to connect with groups at high school. So we're going to connect with the Gay Straight Alliance group at high schools. We're going to connect with the Latino club. We're going to connect with all these different clubs so that we can come together and figure out a way to make fair education a reality in those schools. So I think that's 5 minutes. If it's not, I'm more than happy to take questions or repeat something if somebody would like.
Does anybody have any questions for Dolores really quick?
Cool. So one of the things I also want to reiterate is that I'm really lucky to have a lot of youth that are really excited about disability history. And what I want to say is that for many people, they may be doing some of this work alone. At many of the school boards that we went to, it was only one person who was there who got to speak, and the school board still passed it unanimously. So even if you feel like maybe right now you don't know anyone that's interested, it's definitely still possible to do small steps on your own and make this a reality in your area.
All right, thank you so much, Doris. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so that takes us to our next slide of questions and answers for the webinar. But before we start, I'd like to introduce my coworker who will be joining me for the questions and answers. I'd like to introduce the new statewide community organizer here at CFILC, Ted Jackson.
Hi, this is Ted. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ted.
I can hear you.
Great. So thank you for having me on. This has been really informational and really powerful. And I just wanted to, before we start questions, I just wanted to make a comment about something that I've been thinking as I listen to everything, and that is really the spirit of what the FAIR Act is and how we turn that into action. And for many of you who are youth in the YO program, you've really been working on this for the past couple of or few years, but not really through Disability History Week. I'm thinking about through the program Own My Power, because that's what the FAIR Act really is. It's about owning your power. I was just thinking about Ray's story about how some folks got around a small apartment coffee table and mapped out the city and decided that they would own their power to change their community. And what Dolores talked about in getting lesson plans and disability history into the schools, that was really about regular everyday folks, people with disabilities and their supporters going and embracing the process, engaging the process, and making it happen. And so while the FAIR Act does talk about teaching LGBT history, people with disabilities history, Native American history, and so forth in the schools, it really is about owning power, and it's about giving power to the teachers and the school boards to work with the parents to create the lesson plans, and the community activists and the folks who care like us to engage them to make sure that the implementation happens. And so that's what's so exciting about this to me, and really moving forward and thinking about what are those next steps? How are we going to engage so that we can hold accountable that this great law happens in school districts across California?
All right, thank you, Ted. That was great. I definitely agree that it is about owning my power as well. So I definitely agree with you on that. But for the questions and answers, does anybody have any questions about anything that we've gone over or anything that you've been thinking of? Yes, John.
Rick, I'm calling in, so you'll have to read the question.
John Viet says he's from Our Family Coalition, and I'm currently building a comprehensive, user-friendly website that will include lessons and information related to the Fair Education Act. It will be at www.faireducationact.com and is slated for mid to late February launch. If you have any lessons you'd like to submit or any tips and suggestions, please email submit@faireducationact.com. No problem, John.
That's great, and that's going to be a great resource.
Definitely, that's going to be a really good resource. Really good.
It's going to be a very, very good resource, and already on the YO website, yodisabledandproud.org, under Disability History Week, there's a lot of the disability history lesson plans. So it's really good that we're preparing to gather information, but I want to remind folks that, we have to actually make this happen. We need to have those libraries of information and materials and historical data and lesson plans out there. But we also need to remember that it can't just sit there. It has to make its way into a classroom, and it has to make its way into the hands of the administrators in schools, the teachers, and the parents to form those lesson plans and to do their part of the bargain. And our part of the bargain is really to go out and to activate, to engage, and to implement this type of education in our schools. Two work hand in hand, I think.
All right, thank you for that, Ted. Does anybody else have any other questions? Any questions about anything? Dolores, what are some of the first steps that everyone can do, either by themselves or as a group, starting today, once this call is over? And this could be a question for me, Kirk, or for anyone, really. I would personally say one of the first steps to getting that people can do once this call's over is just to get the word out there about the FAIR Act, because there's a lot of people out there that don't even know that the FAIR Act exists. So coming from my perspective, I would say that'd be one step that people could take to as soon as the call's over, is just get the word out there. I don't know if anybody else has any other suggestions. If Ted, if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, Kirk, I think that folks could email us, and our emails are pretty simple. It's either ted@cfilc.org or kirk@cfilc.org. And I think we would be willing to spend some time on the phone with you and walk you through some of the materials and the resources and the connections that were in this PowerPoint for the webinar today, like the SELPAs and the local school boards, and talk to you about how you could build a team of citizens who would like to engage with the school board and get on their agenda.
Does anybody else have any other any questions or any suggestions of what people can do when the Rosie, I'm planning on looking over the links and resources for people to contact in my area. That sounds great, Rosie. Sounds like that's going to be your first step for once the webinar is over. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments, or any suggestions what they want to do or can do for first steps? Sarah Musavian. There's also monthly teleconference calls which people can get involved with, both for the FAIR Education Act Implementation Committee and for Disability History Week. Those are both great things that people can join, Sarah. You're definitely right. Definitely. And if you want to get involved in those teleconference calls, please do feel free to contact me. My information will be coming up in a couple slides. Or I can direct you to Sarah Musavian also, who is very involved in both those teleconference calls. Anybody else have any suggestions about how to start, or anybody else have any questions about anything? Any last minute questions before we end this up? Anya, how do you get people involved besides educating them about the FAIR Act? Another way to, let's see. And Dolores, what about if advocates from ILCs connect with me to find youth in your areas to involve in YO? That's a great way to do it too. And Anya, to answer your question, yeah, definitely. One thing that we can get people to actually do is something we mentioned in the webinar a little earlier, is maybe to not necessarily spread the knowledge, but try and get people to go to the PTA meetings with you, sit in, because the more people that are around for these meetings to show that we have support for this and want this to happen, the better too. So I'd say just going to meetings and showing them that we actually care about this is one step to doing it. And Madeline, Teresa, and Rachel, we can also connect with youth from YLF. That's definitely a great resource too. And Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter are definitely great tools to get people involved. Anybody else have any last minute questions or suggestions before we wrap it up, since it looks like it's getting past, unless people want to stay on the webinar? All right, well, if there are no other questions, I will wrap this up then. You can contact us. You can contact us at yodisabledproud.org, and you can also get a hold of us through the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, feel free to call us at any of these numbers. And if you want to talk to me or Ted directly, you can contact me at 916-325-1690 at extension 342, or you can email me at kirk@cfilc.org, or you can contact Ted also at also 916-325-1690 at extension 337 though. And you can email him at ted@cfilc. So we have pretty simple email addresses if people prefer emails. And that is about it. Thanks again, everybody, for coming, and hopefully you'll have a great evening. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.